Thank you. The creation of this workshop began in 2020 when Live Actor Simulation received a grant from the Aboriginal Education Council. It has been an exciting and challenging process to bring this work to you today, where we ask the question, who are you in this story? For those of you who are signing in, please note that we'll add into the chat. We try to make sure you receive the participants' handout in advance, but if not, it is in the chat. It is something that would accompany any time we present this simulation. And you will see that it is a slightly different presentation than a traditional live actor simulation. Again, it's been an exciting and challenging process, and we're interested in knowing who you are in this story. And as a way of introduction, I am Catherine Turner, and for over 17 years, I've been a writer, trainer, and facilitator here at Live Actor Simulation. If I may just confirm, has Chandra been able to join us? Oh, there. Chandra, welcome. And I will ask Chandra, one of our amazing colleagues and important people on this process, to please introduce herself. Chandra.
Bonjour, everyone. I'm Bapanokwe. I'm Chandra, and I've been a simulator through Ryerson for a long time. Very excited to be brought onto this project as consultant, Aboriginal storyteller, and I'm excited to see the process today. Thanks.
Thank you, Chandra. And now to Karen Arthurton, who will be facilitating the actual simulation. Karen, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Karen Arthurton. My pronouns are she and her, and I am very privileged to be here today. I have certainly used laser for a number of years and can attest to what an incredible experience it is. I'm in community services in the social work department, teaching years 2, 3, and 4. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. And now I'll be turning it over. Do we know, just the last person thing, is Jack Edwards here? Is Jack here? Before we begin.
I just left a voicemail on a number. I'm assuming it's what we have in our
right
on our active roster.
Right. Sorry, I just thought it's if we can begin, if I could turn it over to Karen. Karen is all of you here today are, for this first part of our workshop, will be as if you are participants in the workshop. You're the learners in the workshop. You will experience what perhaps your students will experience if it's brought into one of your classes or into another workshop. So I'll turn it over to Karen as our instructor facilitator for today. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Welcome, everybody. How are you? How are you? Get the chat going a little bit. How are you? What's it like to be back? First day of class. How are you feeling? Come on, get a little bit in the chat. Great, wonderful, good, excited. How was summer? Did it fly by? Yes. Okay. Summer is still here. It's true. Absolutely. Summer is still here. We're going to enjoy every single moment of it. As I mentioned before, my name is Karen, and I am so pleased to be here. I'd like to begin by speaking to my positioning as a settler on First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people's lands. I think it's important for me to begin from a place of, I am not an expert. I am on a journey to learn, to grow, to continue to decolonize my mind, body, and my spirit, to really kind of look at the ways in which I can be a better treaty person. I can, be a better human, and that includes, my role as an instructor, etc. But, the process of decolonizing mind, body, and spirit is an ongoing process for myself. I do not, as I mentioned, claim to be an expert. I'm in a process of knowing, and I give gratitude to those who have provided support to me, who have been there and been incredibly patient. So I recognize that. I also recognize the complexities of who I am in terms of my mixed race background. I'm a fair-skinned, mixed-raced individual. I come from a background of colonized and colonizer. I recognize the many ways in which whiteness has been internalized and the ongoing struggle to really interrupt whiteness, which is foundational to our work. And again, to me being a better human on the land. One of the things that you will find in our class as we move through our numerous weeks to get together is that I invite folks to do a couple things. And one is in coming weeks, we will talk about the love ethic. And the love ethic is an incredible article by Gold in 2017 that also highlights the work of bell hooks, rest in power bell hooks, and calls attention to the use of love in practice in the classroom. And when I say that, I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm not talking about those components. I'm talking about love for community. I'm talking about the way in which it has been a privilege for me to witness the narratives of my students and for them to entrust me. From that, I am incredibly grateful. But I find that if I'm to do this work in a good way, the aspect of love for self, love for community, love for the land, love for my colleagues, love for my students must be part of, of my ongoing practice. Otherwise, I run the risk of causing further harm. And that is not what I'm here to do. One of the other components that I'm going to invite folks to do throughout our classes is to critically reflect, right? To look at what are our values, our assumptions, our biases, right? What are the ways in which, we can really dig deep using the work of Eli Clare in terms of who are we, right? Examining those values. And I can tell you that, for someone who's been in the field before I started teaching, for 25 plus years, that I was so privileged to listen to the narratives of my young people who were constantly colliding with systemic injustice, right? But without reflecting upon who I am as an individual, as a human, as an instructor, I can't do this work in a good way. So I'm going to invite us today to reflect, to examine, to look at our unconscious biases. And the work may be difficult, but I can tell you from my own experiences that it's worth it. And as much as I'm an instructor today, I'm also a student. I am here to learn from all of you. I am here to learn from my colleagues, my students. And again, I'm so grateful to all my colleagues some of which who are in this room, for their support, for their guidance, and for contributing to holding me up at times where, challenging times can happen, but I'm forever grateful. So I believe in one of the other components that I think is very important is self-care. And when we talk about self-care, I'm not talking about getting nails done and hair did and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about our emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. During this time, we're going to invite you to get comfortable and to remove any distractions if feasible. I will also note that Jacques' narrative may be very close to your heart, so I invite you to take care of your mind, body, and spirit. As a simulation refers to water, we invite you to have water with you and acknowledge its value. We would prefer that you not take notes, right, with pens or paper or typing. We would invite you to listen to the narrative of Jacques and to listen in a respectful way. This includes paying attention to your feelings about what you're hearing. And it also means listening to new concepts without challenging them out loud. So before I introduce Jacques, I'd like you to consider the following questions. When you think about including Indigenous culture concepts and addressing anti-Indigenous racism in your class, do you feel nervous about it? Can you describe what makes you nervous? When listening to the narrative, What policy, ideas, or issues could relate to my field of study? It is now my privilege to introduce.
Just for a second, Karen, if we may.
Yes.
We've just heard that Jack is not able to, can't get into the chat, but Maggie will be joining us today. So, and we are turning to our Maggie Edwards, who will be here today
Okay.
to tell her story. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Unfortunate Jack is not able to be with us, but please welcome Maggie. Welcome Maggie to our classroom. So today we are meeting Maggie, right? Who is a student at the university. Maggie is joining the class to tell us the story, to tell us their story and engage you in a discussion about anti-Indigenous racism and how things might get better. If you've been part of live actor simulation before, this will be different. Maggie will share their story and will then ask you questions for reflection and discussion. They are in the class as a student, graphic designer, and as such, they are expected to have they are not expected to have a historian or expert on treaties or environmental law. This is their story. They hope you will discover new ideas and reflect on your place and your responsibilities. She was inspired by what she experienced and what she hopes will be too. On that note, Maggie, welcome to our class. It is a privilege to have you here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie. Thanks for having me in your class. So I'm Cree. I'm from Attawapiskat, and I'm actually studying creative industries here at Ryerson. I'm an illustrator and graphic designer. So I'm kind of a Torontonian now, but I was born in Sudbury, but I grew up here. And my mom is awesome. She moved back to Attawapiskat in 2007, but actually worked as a nurse in Sudbury, worked here in Timmins. So I grew up with my mom doing her nursing work in these different places. So since she moved back, gosh, that's been a few years now. So I really miss her. But yeah, she's a blast. She's like, okay, I'm just gonna say it. She just loves her number one daughter because I'm an only child. But honestly, she really does love me the best out of all of me. Yeah, so anyway, so she's moved home. I'm happy that she's happy, but I do miss her. So the story that I'm going to tell you is just the day that my mom called me, and she had a sound in her voice that I have never heard before. So my mom called and told me that she was in Ottawa, and she said she wanted me to come up and see her. And actually, she was very insistent, and she wanted me to come to the I Don't Know More rally and meet Chief Spence. And that's our chief. Mom knew that I wasn't really one for like rallies and protests, but I had to be there, so I needed to get there. And so I was like, okay, I would love to see my mom. And I kind of heard something about I Don't Know More, but I really didn't know what it was. But what was most important for me, like that drew me in, was that our chief was on a hunger strike. So that had really caught my attention. Anyway, so I found out that they had buses booked through Council Fire here in Toronto. So I got myself on one of the buses. Now I got to tell you, I'm not a morning person, but this bus left at like 7:30 in the morning. So I was there bright and early. And it was kind of an interesting trip because the weather just got worse and worse and worse. So as we were driving, we saw people in the ditch, like when we were in the bus going, no, let's get there. We got up there, we were actually late, and we had to run through all this rain and snow to get to the back of the march, which was huge. It was awesome. So when we actually made our way up into the crowd, what was kind of great about it was just seeing all the flags of all the different nations and all the different people that were represented there that had traveled from all over to be part of it. And we were freezing. And I don't know if you know this kind of snow, but it's like, it's not really snow, it's like slush balls that fall from the sky. So that thing was soaked through all of us. Oh my gosh, it was the craziest thing. I actually couldn't find my mom in the crowd. So what we were there for was like look, our treaties need to be honored and the water and the land protected. Bill C-35 was going to be put through by Harper, and it was going to strip all the environmental protections from most of the waters. And we just couldn't sit by while this happened. And my mom, okay, Mom, you were right. I needed to be there. So I didn't find her, but I actually met up with her later at the Native Center in Ottawa, where they had a feast. And again, just to say how soaked we were with slush, we all were there on concrete in bare feet because we took all those slushy boots off and our socks, and we were all trying to let them dry around the corners of the room. So this was like a winter barefoot get together that we had because our feet were so cold. So kind of once I had been through all this and been at the feast with everybody, I really felt like I couldn't get back to the bus and go home. And I felt like I just needed to stay with my mom and Chief Spence. Now, Chief Spence was in her teepee on Victoria Island. And so what we did, I just kind of sat with my mom and her. We were visiting and we would make her tea. There was firekeepers, so I would go and sit with the firekeepers. And again, I'm a designer, like I'm a kind of a computer person, so I'm not always like out there keeping fire and stuff. But you know what? It was a good experience to hang out. And literally just hang out because people would come and there would be media attention and meetings and stuff. So we would just kind of scooch over to the side. But there was other times, there was long stretches where we just sat and we were quiet with our chief. She was just doing something kind of amazing. So Mom, being a nurse, she was part of the team that was helping her stay as healthy as possible on her hunger strain. These folks that were helping literally worked around the clock. Just every possible thing that we could do to help her while she made this sacrifice. So that's the story of my trip. And then when I came back, I started going to some more events. There was round dances and again, the freezing cold, but it was never as cold as that day. So, you know, I'm not like a big round dance person, but I got right in there. I went to a few more, like I could take off a little time from work and go be part of things. I'm just not used to that. Like I'm not really one that goes to marches and rallies. So, and then in terms of treaties, like I have to say I got kind of numb to the idea that people just laugh about treaties. But, you know, we actually have to share the land in a good way for all of our sake. And we should have been doing it all along. And that's the basis, in my opinion, because I don't have a real understanding of exactly what all the treaties say, but I mean, I think it's about sharing the land. I don't think it's about just do whatever you want. I have to say, it's kind of funny though, because I am not really one that would ever say that. So it's kind of changed a lot of things for me to even be standing up in front of you saying these things. So I did start to notice some of the things though that were throwing me off. Like I would go to a rally. I remember this one rally that I went to, and they had a really specific set of speakers, and they were able to go through, like, I can't do this, but these people went through every single treaty, what it was, what year it was, and what the terms were of this treaty, and what kind of area that it was part of, and different treaties for here, and another part of the land had a different kind of treaties, very, very specific. And when I saw the news that night, I went home and I checked, and they had reported on it. And what they were saying was people were complaining about housing. And I was like, well, housing is an issue, but I was there, it wasn't about that. And then the next time I went to one at City Hall, and Harper had been on the news talking about corrupt chiefs. And by implication, he was kind of saying even my chief was like, you know, corrupt in some way. And sure enough, I went home and I checked the news that night, and all the stories were about grassroots versus the chiefs. And, you know, a reporter actually came up to me and was like, what do you think about the grassroots versus the chiefs? And I'm like, I just had to remind them, I'm actually here to talk about the water. And that's actually why we're here. So it just felt like I would get there and they already decided what the story was going to be. So no matter what actually happened, that's the story they were going to tell. And the thing is, all these are actually issues. So they're going to find somebody in the crowd that will match up to the story they want to tell. But actually, that's not what happened because I was there. I knew that's not what happened. And then there's the coverage of Chief Spence. And the more I watched this, the more it wasn't okay. Because they were doing fat jokes, literally fat jokes about this chief, my chief, who had actually done something like, do any of your leaderships ever do that for you? Can you think of anybody in your life that would go out and go without food to pray for you and to stand up for you? And they're saying, oh, you know, she can't be on a hunger strike. Look at her. And this is the story that was going out. I don't always really speak up about racism because, to be honest, it usually turns around and kicks me in the butt twice as hard as if I didn't say anything. Like sometimes you just kind of roll through it. But this was my home. This was my family. And that was my chief. She was sacrificing and doing everything she could for us. And to be treated like that. I share my story about Idle No More and Chief Spence to help us explore our relationships with the land, the water, and each other. And it's given me a lot to think about in terms of where my responsibilities are. I'm actually so inspired by Chief Spence and everybody that has stood up for the waters and our people. Like I said, I'm not a big time activist and stuff, but I really got to hand it to those people that work so hard. Now I feel really strong as a Cree person and I want to do my best. That's who I am in this story. Now I want to ask you, who are you in this story? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. My heart is deeply touched, and I thank you with gratitude for sharing your narrative with us. And you posed the question that I would invite participants to begin to talk about, which is, who are you in this story?
You can put something in the chat or raise your hand.
Much gratitude happening in the chat. Take a minute or so, folks, and think about, who are you in the story? As you were listening to Maggie's narrative, how did it touch mind, body, heart? Invite some comments in the chat, folks, or if folks would like to unmute and share.
I'm happy to start, Karen.
Thank you, Renee.
First of all, Maggie, thank you so much for sharing that. There were some parts of it that were really relatable for myself as like a daughter and as a Black person on this land. And I really appreciated how you started out talking about your mom and then branched in to the rest of your family, and the sense of like pride that you had in that was so connected to the politics and what was happening in the moment. Like you were able to connect family and lineage and pride, and that was really relatable. And the second thing that was really relatable, or where I felt I was in your story, is this idea of the consequence of talking about racism. I think you said something like it kicks you in the butt twice as hard. And that was really kind of profound to me, at the risk of taking that and the risk of using voice, and yet still people do it to the best that they can. So I thought I found myself in those two pieces.
Yeah, Renee, I appreciate that. That's, I mean, it's something I kind of didn't really think about until I actually started to speak up about one thing. And then I realized, why don't I speak about some of those other things? And sometimes it's like, I got stuff to do, I'm busy. So you can't always, you got to pick your battles sometimes. But now, maybe I'm standing up a few more of those issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Renee. I'm going to read a couple comments from the chat, and then I'm going to acknowledge the hands that are up. One comment says, I am the listener. I listen and learn. I felt like I was the chief where people are making fun of you behind your back. I'm often skeptical of dominant narratives, so I don't recall buying the corrupt chief story. I found it very impactful to have Maggie call out what the leader would do this for you. It brought me back to a time when I was reflecting upon where I was in my learning journey at the time. I supported Island more at the time, but my understanding of treaties back then was not very deep or nuanced. I remembered being angry at the PM's comments in light of the sacrifice Chief Spence was making to protect the waters. So I guess I am mostly a passive supporter in the story. Thank you, folks, for sharing. I see Lynn and Becky. I'll invite you to share with us.
Sorry, I'm on my tablet, so it's a bit messed up. Bonjour, mina dunebe queen dishnakas. Wawashkiji and Dodom, Sudbury and Digiba, Nishnabi Métis Queen Dow. I'm Lynn LaValle. I'm shoot. You know what? There's something happening in the house, so I'll come back. Okay? Sorry, I didn't know that was gonna happen.
No worries, Lynn. Becky.
Oh, sorry. For me, what really resonated was Maggie's frustration. So I think like I find myself as an observer or listener or reader of that story. I remember at the time I was living overseas and reading about this. And I think the part that resonated with me the most is sort of others hijacking the cause or the issues that were trying to be raised. So rather than listening to the story and the words, you know, of the people that are moving this, you know, like you said, they're putting another story together. So for me, I guess I feel the sort of like the pride that you talked about, Maggie, for people standing up and doing something. And then that also that frustration of, you know, someone trying to take that away or change that. So, and I think that ultimately leads to anger. And I wish looking back, you hear about it, you watch it and you read it and you realize there's more that like I could have done, that lots of other people could have done, instead of it just being this piece of news or this story that you're angry about, instead of just being angry and frustrated about, finding more ways to actually enact action and help and jump on board.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Becky. Lynn, are you?
Oh, I guess I can't try again.
No? Okay. Yvonne.
No, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Maggie. Thank you so much for your grace in sharing your story. And I think your story resonates so well with me and perhaps with all of us in a small way. I find so many themes of your lived experiences resonating with mine. And I will touch on some in terms of the lived life in academia and just the lived life as a person. So as a person, I too feel deeply the impact of racism as a lived experience day to day, in big ways and in small ways, in things I observe and have enacted in my life. But I will say this for your story in academia and that lived experience of being an educator and having some knowledge about the meaning of Idle No More and how you brought it out so poignantly, how you started this journey. It tells me that there is so much work to be done in knowledge making about the history from a personal level and what it means to be person citizen, how important it is for us to join our individual voices to the collective voices of the rights that are promised and still so elusive. And the fact that we even talk about rights that are having to be fought for when they should just be is deeply painful,
Yes.
deeply painful. Having to fight for rights that are just gifts as a human being should have. And to know that the rights continue to be trampled on, continue to be fought for, and continue to be negated and kicked to the margins, and to be made fun of, and to be reconstructed in media in different ways than they have been for you and for so many others who put themselves on the line for these rights. So many things resonated with me. It's emotional, and I could go on, but I will stop there. But just to say enough respect, because I'm Jamaican, so I have to say enough respect to you for sharing your story, and that we can perhaps leave this session today with knowing how important it is to know the meaning of Idle No More, and that it is important that we continue to join our individual voices to the collective for these rights that should just be. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. To refer to a comment in the chat that says Maggie kept saying she wasn't an activist. It reminded me about how much we self-reflect on ourselves out of our right to participate in social change, myself included. I think of, when I think of activism, I always think about these grand, participations, but I really do believe that we can be activists in everyday life. And to Maggie's point, it takes, right? It's exhausting. It is exhausting. It reminded me when you were talking, Maggie, about the daily microaggressions that occur, and the cumulative impact that it has on our minds, our bodies, our spirits. And one of the components I've really come to appreciate it is how much we need each other. And that, is easier said than done. But I can tell you, without the colleagues, beside me, I wouldn't be able to do this work, because the work is exhausting. It's exhausting. And, thinking back to frontline work, it's part of the reason I left the field, was because we kept losing our young people and my heart kept breaking. And when I felt that I couldn't bring love to it anymore, it was time to take a break. Right? So it was time to kind of invite our young folks, who I believe are our change makers, to continue to engage in activism.
I'm going to tell you a bonus story. It's quick. One of the times we did a walk, there was about 3,000 of us walking along College Street, and there was a gal standing in a storefront, and she just stood there, however long it took us to all, and she just clapped by herself, because she couldn't get off work, right? So, and it was like, I was looking over my shoulder and see that she just made like as much eye contact as she could and just clapped as a one person. But I think, what if millions of people did it, and it didn't have to be 3,000 of us, it could be 3 million other people. I might not be quite as tired, but anyway, just a bonus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Maggie. I'm just checking in on our time, folks. I also just want to capture, there's a lot of going on in the chat. Tay says, Maggie, related to the experiences of someone determining the narrative before I've had a chance or a moment to speak. Thank you so much, Tay. Lynn, are you able to join us now?
I'm going to move into another room, and hopefully, and I'm going to try to be quick. Sorry about my moving camera. Miigwech, Maggie, and I arrived a bit late, but I heard most of the story, and I do remember the fat jokes about Chief Spence, and remembering that when she was out, I was just remembering going fasting, and I lasted 4 days, 4 nights. That's the longest I've gone. So I was really watching. I was watching from the lens of how is her health, right? Is she going to be able to do this? So that was first and foremost for me. The other piece that I thought about whenever I think about the lands is I think about, you know, where our ancestors are buried, right? Because with my ancestors, I literally went last weekend up in Temiskaming, and while my grandparents are in the cemetery, the rest are in the fields, right? So I looked at the fields and I'm wondering where they are. And, you know, so I think that the fight for the land is so important. And I just want to say miigwech, Maggie, for, you know, coming today and speaking, you know, to all of these little boxes on the screen. So that's why I turned my camera on. I will turn it off. I think the thing is going to go on upstairs again. So miigwech, Karen, and everybody who organized this.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
There it goes.
So much.
So Karen, at some point, are we feeling like it might be shifty time?
I think it's 50 time.
I think it's shifty. It's shifty time.
So listen, everybody, just deal with the fact that I'm about to rename my my little box again. I'm gonna go back to being Chandra. We had a whole different thing set up for this. Okay, I'm Chandra. Hello. So when we thought about making a workshop for faculty using this story, we needed to make a workshop that could be for any faculty, which is not usually how it's done. And Karen named microaggressions. It's a one-off in this story. It actually is not central to the story. It's there because I'm Anishinaabe, because I'm Cree. If I'm Maggie, I'm Cree. If I'm Chandra, I'm Anishinaabe. But also that there's many, many layers of race, structural, institutional, corporate, government, other types of anti-Indigenous racism embedded within the story. So if I'm a professor and I'm looking for that to be in my field, it's there, but it's finding all those different layers that aren't about interpersonal. We deliberately de-emphasize the interpersonal so we could look at how I'm starting to talk to you more as less as workshop participants and more as professors who might bring this into your class. So I wanted to kind of talk about that piece about all the different layers of racism, anti-Indigenous racism that are in this story as a way to start getting you into your breakout rooms or whatever else we need to have next. Because I had a little flip of roles there for a second, so now I'm a little off the agenda, but that's what I wanted to bring up into the story. Point.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right. There are multiple, when you know, Chandra offered a definition of anti-Indigenous racism and the ways in which, you know, I can speak to certainly social work, right? And the ways in which, you know, education, child welfare, policing, media discourse, right? All of that needs to be interrogated. And I come full circle to the critical reflective piece around, I need to be aware, right? For years and years, I was naive. I had to do my work and ask myself, why didn't I know? And I'm reminded from from the lessons from social work of what do we know and what are we going to do differently? And it's not enough to apologize. It is about actions, right? It is about moving from performativity to actions. What can I do each and every day, right? To respect the land, to, you know, create safer environments in my classroom for us to have conversations.
So with that in mind, I would like to first of all thank Chandra as Maggie, our simulator as Maggie Edwards. Thank you. And thank you, Chandra and Karen, because now you are transitioning from participant learner role, and to support the transition, an opportunity in breakout rooms to discuss the questions posed as the simulation began. We have about almost 20 minutes in our breakout rooms. So, and there's going to be a facilitator in each room, and you'll go back to those questions about when you think about including Indigenous cultural concepts or addressing anti-Indigenous racism in your class? Do you feel nervous about this? Can you describe what makes you nervous? And while listening to this story, what policies, ideas, or issues could relate to your field of study? So that is what's going to be happening in your breakout rooms. And I will call upon our team to and our facilitators to put you in those breakout rooms, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in the breakout rooms. Thank you so much for that. And what we're hoping for is to hear from the breakout rooms. And I have some of the presenters who so kindly agreed to facilitate. So I thought, in the interest of time, we've got about 20 minutes or so, or 15 minutes left. I will call upon the folks at the facilitators in room and whoever's presenting to please share a few thoughts about what you discussed in terms of, you know, the nervousness that's being experienced, or how you could add this into your work in your field of study. So I'm going to call upon Curtis to begin, if I may, his group.
Yes. So in terms of that first question, you know, I think we had a really rich discussion, and you know, it focused on a lot of common themes around, you know, trying to understand when we have enough knowledge or confidence to be able to facilitate in a way that was intentionally and effectively inclusive. So certainly tied to that fear of saying the wrong thing, or not having enough information, or being worried about doing more harm than good when speaking up, or when raising issues like this. And you know, we also even talked a little bit about this kind of scenario and doing this online in this way, and how you know, when you first asked the question about, you know, who are you in this story, we were all kind of behind our black boxes and if you will, not having to sort of sit with our discomfort in the way that we might if we were sitting and we could see each other. So we came up with a bunch of stuff around that, about, you know, what it means to sit in discomfort, and how difficult that can be, and how safe we feel to be able to do it.
Great. Thank you, Curtis. I'll turn to Renee Ferguson's breakout room. Who would like to present on behalf of Renee? And it's Graham. Oops.
Yeah.
You're muted.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Let's see. There's some of the things on challenges. I mean, what one part is just engaging students in it. You know, to say, you know, I guess students come here for a subject, childhood education, organizational behavior, and you know, how do we engage them about here's this side to it. Let's incorporate some of this. And the other part was around authenticity. So, you know, one of our members even talked about the land acknowledgement, and I think, you know, she was trying to see whether it was starting to feel rote for her, how she could make it, whether she was, you know, questioning whether she was making it meaningful, and just so that she could feel that it was, yeah. So and also came up about, I guess, with the engaging, the other side of it is triggering students, so that whether you want to call it white fragility, something like that, and it's a shame that sometimes it means that you have to deal more with the least oppressed groups than the most oppressed groups. But anyway, so.
Great, thanks, Graham, on behalf of your group. If I may call upon Yvonne Simpson's group. Hi. Hi.
Hi. So around the sort of question of that nervousness, we had some good conversation around experiences of things like perfection paralysis, this desire to be, as in some cases, as good an ally as possible, but also that nervousness around, you know, wondering if one is doing the right thing at the right time. And more generally, just the group shared experiences of vulnerability We did discuss the challenge in some settings where there can be skepticism that issues in fact exist, and there can be perhaps evasion of some of these issues. And we talked about the importance of sharing resources with students from the very beginning of their educational journey around this type of work. And in particular, just the importance of and the emphasis on building empathy. We talked a little bit about how, you know, when we're looking at unpacking our own personal, historical, and cultural sort of background and experiences, you know, how important that is, and to understand our own positionality, but also in some cases to find there may be common experience, shared experience that helps build understanding and empathy. And we also discussed the particular challenges in taking up this work and this subject with students. In the case of racialized instructors, where the challenge of managing boundaries, the sense that sometimes students themselves might approach the subject in a way that can be quite charged, and how one can navigate or mitigate things in a way that preserves dignity for everyone, while supporting students in developing and moving forward in this work. So those are the notes I have, but I would also welcome my group to jump in, because you know, I'm not comfortable necessarily speaking for everyone, but that's what I captured.
Thank you, Maureen. Chandra, did you host a group? Yep, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay, no matter how many times I clicked on it, I was clicking it off. Yeah, I did. Elsie, you're off the hook, so I'm gonna replay. So we spent a lot of time on. No, I'll take it. Sorry, you were all set to go. So we did spend a lot of time on the nerves, and part of that was me just scrambling around looking for the document that we were looking at. But when we actually gave the time to lean into it a bit more, I think we came up with some things around not wanting to just feel like it's all on. I know I'm going to put together 17 different things, but it's all on this professor to present or represent what actually should be co-created and what actually should be shared with actual Indigenous bodies in the room. So I'm going to take another moment to, if that's okay, I hope that made some kind of sense, but I'm going to take a moment then to bring this comment that I was going to put in earlier and I forgot, which is around casting. And so professors need to know that there is a thing that happens. I'll just throw all the universities under the bus so you can all just take your share, that if we don't have a Native person handy, we're going to write this picture in such a way that someone else could come in and play Indian. And I've definitely been one of the few Native people in the room when 40 other people were not Native to go in and play Native people because we just don't have enough Indians. I'm going to use the word Indian because I'm actually I'm doing that quite deliberately. You're not going to, I hope, have that experience. So if we don't have enough Indigenous actor simulators, you're not going to be able to book it. That then puts it back on the whole community to let's have some relationships and let's see if we know anybody that's a Native actor and see if we can charm them over. It also goes back to conversations that we've had, because I actually worked as a simulator and in this role where, you know, Indigenous people are busy. If they're a good Indigenous actor to come in and do this work, probably busy. So how are you going to also put them in the blood pressure cuff? How are you also going to put them in a situation that's not that one Native role? That kind of thing. So we've had conversations about casting. It will impact the availability of this. So that thing where you get in a panic and just grab anybody and say you're Native now. I can't even tell you the depth of the trigger. And I'm an actor. I kind of deal with this kind of stuff all the time. But there is stuff that happens for me, like the erasure of Indigenous bodies and replacing them with settler bodies is the core of genocide. Mm-hmm. So we can't do that in a thing that's about anti-Indigenous racism. We're going to talk about anti-Indigenous racism by swapping out a settler for an Indigenous body. It's literally the cornerstone of genocide. Can't do it. So there's been some, I think, good listening and stuff, and also some like, I didn't flip the table over, but there was some things where we just needed to kind of, it's not about casting right now. If you are replicating genocide, you can't do that and also claim to be talking about combating anti-Indigenous racism. And the other thing is, if you violate Indigenous bodies hard enough, they'll turn white. And I'm the survivor of 3 generations of that behavior, which is why your school's got a new name. So it's been a very, very big process, but I just wanted to come back to that conversation about like why we feel nervous is probably because we're trying to have Indigenous knowledges without Indigenous people. So let's just not do that. And that may mean that we have to create some new relationships and have, you know, it's going to be everybody's job to try to help us get enough, payment, right? So if you have people that are already busy simulators because they get all kinds of jobs doing all kinds of other roles, well, you also get the native one too, because we happen to not have it, you know, so the native person that maybe earned like $60 last year because they were only called once, they're not showing up for you next time because you only paid them $60. The other person that's always available and always handy and can slide in and out of all these roles is probably a white person, I'm just going to say, and they're probably more available and probably on the roster more often and busier, and they're handy and they're reliable and all these other things that kind of frame them up in the way white supremacy would frame them up. You know, it's like we accidentally fall into these traps all the time. We have to consciously name them, be uncomfortable, and find ways to undo that. So if you give enough opportunities, your native folks might show up the next time when you actually need them instead of going off to find another gig. Yeah, there's a way to pay. There's because the Indigenous people are bringing a lot to the role too. That you know, Catherine and the folks don't have to try to train them in some ways to do the native stuff as they're bringing it in the room. Anyway, so that's just where I'm going to come in as an actor and as a part of this team, but also to piggyback off of the conversation that we had in a breakout room about the pressure to try to do this without Indigenous people. Well, maybe it's because we shouldn't be doing that in the first place.
Right.
Thank you, activist voice.
Thank you, Chandra. Thank you always. I regret that we were sort of running out of time and very aware of this. It is now almost 2:30. Just a quick, are there any, just a quick moment, are there any really burning questions or observations or comments from your breakout rooms that you would like to share right now? I have a few minutes before we come to an end. As I said, we'll stay on for another 10 minutes or so.
Jump in one more time. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That we actually designed all of this for when that nervousness gets to you, that we have things linked right in the story, and we have part of your job and homework will be to link your course material to the TRC. So that when you're planning to have this in your room, you're going to have, when you get stuck, your room goes quiet, people start saying stuff, you're going to have a way to link this back to something that you do feel confident about, which is your field of study.
Yeah.
It's the short form version of what will actually be a longer conversation later.
And I'm just checking the chat. Any questions? I think Claire had a great one in that we have to start with unlearning before we start about learning. Just wanted to add this as I think it's so true. That's from Elsa, from her group. Anyone else have a final thing that they would like to share, a comment from their group, their breakout room experience?
I will go ahead and share from our group. I think what we struggle with was we sort of try to lean into the discomfort and looking at these different concepts. For example, when we say expertise, do we really mean lived experience? Does it also share that level of knowledge and experience? Because once we remove expertise from like, oh, I'm supposed to be an expert on someone else's life. Well, that doesn't work, right? So let's remove that whole term, expertise. Also, have some of these sort of discussions, even though, again, we're being critical, we're looking to lean into this discomfort. What exactly do we mean by sharing the land, also taking back the land? Also, when we talk about treaties, as someone who's from the United States and just recently moved here, all of the treaties, over 300 treaties were violated in the United States. So are we giving faith to something that should not be a matter of faith? when we talk about treaties. Also, advocating should be advocating for, it shouldn't be advocating for necessarily Indigenous people. It should be advocating with Indigenous people taking the lead, and from an Indigenous cultural lens. We should look at how the money is spent by the government. When we look at policy making, we really should conceptualize it from the deep structures of culture, because each of these concepts can mean something different. For example, when we look at land acknowledgement from colonial settlers, it says, I'm here to only take the land. It's like, well, for some of us who come from a different cultural worldview, we're not here to take, right? And to look at some of these concepts because we mean something different. For example, enslavement meant something different to the colonial folks than to enslaved Africans. So looking at all of these concepts and starting there culturally and looking at those deep structures of culture before we even begin to start making policy changes, because language is different, even in the documents that are signed by those who are participating in the simulations, even the language is different. And how do we sort of start with a different space, a different language, a different cultural worldview, and a different way of being?
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you. I think we'll be winding down. It is just after 2:30. Again, to reiterate what Chandra spoke to, first of all, I want to introduce, thanks to Greg Morris, who is one of our new writers and trainers at Live Actor Simulation. You'll be getting to meet him over time, I'm sure. And again, to Chandra's point, if you should request this simulation, we are here to support you. There is a very detailed facilitation guide, a participants learner handout that would be for your students or anyone participating in a workshop. And you'll get one of us, you'll get a trainer as well that will walk you through things. Again, to Chandra's point, however, to meet a request, we must have an Indigenous simulator for the role. And this is our pledge and this is our challenge. So, again, to Chandra's point about building relationships and bringing people on board. So we'd like to thank so much Chandra in her role as Maggie. Thank you for this. We had a technical issue with Glenn being able to join us today. And again, to our wonderful and extraordinary facilitators, Karen Arthurton and Chandra Spears Bombay, who is just so important. Love working with you. Thank you. And to all our colleagues at Live Actor Simulation and the EL Hub, Nikki Wahid, Jessica Gianfrancesco, Deborah Ithumaya, and Jeff Colomaze for all their work, and Greg, of course. And thanks to the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching for their supporting this work. And I believe there's an evaluation that will be coming to anyone that registered from the center. And as I said, we'll stay online for a few more minutes if there are any further questions about the process or what you need to do or about the simulation, etc. So I want to thank you all. We are just overwhelmed and delighted with the interest in this workshop, and thank you all so much. And great, thank you. And here's how you can reach us. If you have any more information or have questions or you're interested in this simulation. Thank you.
And thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
It's like, I'm so glad that you're organized enough to have the list of everyone, but I want to make sure that you get your
Thank you.
It's been a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been an extraordinary journey for us all here at Live Actor Simulation in working with, building the workshop with Chandra and working with simulators. We've had a pilot already. We've done this workshop today. So there's been so much work that's gone into this, and we hope that people will be interested. Thank you. Are there any burning questions? Hands up or yeah. Anything? Oh, Becky, I see a hand.
So I apologize if this is like an obvious question, or I should know the answer to this. But if someone wanted to do this in their course, for example, and they wanted to do a particular scenario, who should be doing the coordinating of finding the actor or
that's our responsibility always. If it's
Yeah,
our
okay.
simulation, we find we have the actors. It is our roster because we're responsible for them. We're responsible to make sure they're feeling prepared before they walk into a classroom. It's very vulnerable to walk in as a different character because they walk in character.
Yeah.
So we are there to support them and work with them. And it also ensures that they are compensated.
Now, I did kind of tease that we all as a team can start funneling some more Indigenous actors over to the office.
Yeah.
That's a general call out.
Bring them on over.
If you happen to know people, but it's not really your job. It's a request.
Yeah.
Begin
But
the-
yeah, if you,
begin the conversation with our program.
yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry, I had a related question.
Sure.
So in terms of, you know what I mean, the narrative or the story that an actor walks in with, do you have certain story that you want to tell, or that's something that an instructor could work with you to, you know what I mean, maybe there's a particular topic or something like that you want to be flagged in a class, or that it's connected to curriculum, or is it more that you find that story and then you find ways to connect it to the curriculum based on that narrative?
I think it's designed where you pull from this story.
Yeah,
to pull your curriculum piece.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you
But-
very much.
Becky, where are you teaching? What school are you in?
So I'm in the psychology department.
Okay.
Yeah.
We actually have, of course have a catalog of over 100 simulations.
Yeah,
So
I need to look through all of these.
yeah, so if you're,
Okay.
and again, just reach out to us and we'll have a conversation with you, because we could perhaps guide you to what might be helpful in your classroom. But this simulation, as we've demonstrated today, stands on its own.
Okay. Yeah. I teach the psychology of prejudice and discrimination, which is there's obvious connections, and then we
Of
also
course.
do like history and theory of psychology is another thing. But this was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Becky.
Really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions we can help? The obvious ones are always the important ones. Right? Anyone with any other questions?
Well, I'd like to just pose the difficulty in terms of for professors, the fine line between having Indigenous people come in to speak, for your class. I mean, hopefully there's an honorarium. And sometimes if there is an honorarium, it's not very much, like maybe, but then I'm also concerned about sort of like what we would call it for like the Black tax. Is there an Indigenous tax where you now have Indigenous people where we have very few within the university, or even if we're looking outside, where we're now asking them to do much of this work, much of this labor, and a lot of it can be unpaid or underpaid. And I'm struggling with that.
Yeah, as we do. Thank you, Valerie.
Sorry,
Becky,
I had another question.
Sure, go ahead.
And actually, Valerie's point speaks to this question. I was wondering, is about funding. You know what I mean? So is there something that we should be applying to secure funding to pay for that actor? Should we be looking at within our department, within our faculty, within the university?
Well, yeah, good point. We are the live actor simulation is a cost recovery program at Ryerson, at Toronto Metropolitan. I've been around too long. It's been 17 years. Sorry. And yes, if you were to book a simulation or whatever one it may be, including this one, yes, you have to get. Often schools and faculties have funds for things like this, so it is a case of we ask you to check. And that the cost would be covered.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I don't mind begging for money from multiple people.
Right, thank you. Any final questions?
I'm just going back to Valerie just to say that if they are paid, these are paid gigs for actors. And because they're working with actors that are aware of everybody's schedule, so an Indigenous actor in this role is going to be the same person that has to squeeze it in between an audition and, so it's not a case of asking someone to come in and volunteer. My other point was also keep them busy with other roles so that you actually have people showing up more often.
Right, absolutely.
So they're paid gigs.
Yeah.
And I was also talking about, like, for example, having faculty having other faculty, or faculty having the very few Indigenous faculty come in and speak. And that seems like a tax that's being paid by Indigenous people, by, you know, Black faculty, and that struggle. Because again, we're, you know, it's that struggle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know that most dean's offices, and I think Arts does this, I'm not sure where else, but you know, they're starting to create funds very specifically to compensate speakers. So I think that I feel like that's a sweep that's actually going, that we will see more and more of across the university. But I think it's also, you know, I'd like to encourage you as well, like, you know, connect with your dean's office to see, because it's not just social work, it probably happens across all the programs. So is there funding available? You know, or is there a pocket of money available to compensate folks for that tax, as you mentioned, so that it's a tax on us administratively versus our storytellers or those who are here to share experience. And it starts with one conversation. And I know that's how it started in Arts for sure.
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Thank you. Well, it is now almost 2:45, and I thank you all for remaining for any final questions. But thank you all so much for being here. And again,
can I just send Karen
yes.
a big hug too?
Yes.
Karen, thank you so much.
Yes.
Really, really lovely to work with you today on this project.
Yeah,
Our
always.
professor.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. With that in mind, I will bid you good afternoon, and we hope to hear from some of you or all of you. Looking forward to bringing this kind of incredible experience into your classroom or your area of work. So thank you so much.